Hello everyone. Welcome back to Zodiac Sleep Channel. Tonight, we begin something new. Same signs, same stars, but different stories, different people, different worlds. Tonight's story belongs to Capricorn, to the one who is always climbing, the one who sets the goal before anyone else has looked up at the mountain. The one who plans every step, every contingency, every possible way that something could go wrong, and then goes anyway. The one who has confused exhaustion with weakness for so long that they have forgotten what rest actually feels like. Tonight's story is about Jonas. He is 23 years old. He is in the Swiss Alps. There is a snowstorm outside the mountain hut where he is sitting, and he did not reach the summit today, and he is going to have to find a way to be all right with that. He will, but first, he needs tonight. Get comfortable. Take a slow breath. This one is for the Capricorn, who has been climbing for a very long time. Tonight, the mountain holds you. Let's begin. Chapter 1. He had turned back at 2,800 meters, not because he couldn't go further. He could have gone further. His body was capable of it. His legs still had strength, his lungs were working, the technical difficulty of the route was within his abilities. He had turned back because the weather had changed in the way that alpine weather changed, which was to say suddenly and without apology, and continuing would have been not difficult, but genuinely dangerous. And there was a difference between the two that he had spent 3 years learning to respect. He respected it. He did not like it. The hut was small and wooden and had been here since 1923, according to the plaque beside the door, which meant it had seen a century of exactly this. Climbers coming in from the weather, defeated or cautious or simply tired, and sitting at the wooden table by the window and looking at the mountain they had not reached. Jonas was sitting at the wooden table by the window, looking at the mountain he had not reached. He was 23 years old, and he had been climbing since he was 16. Since his father had taken him up his first proper peak in the Bernese Oberland on a July morning that had been perfect in every way, the kind of morning that made you understand immediately and completely why people did this. He had understood immediately and completely. He had been chasing that understanding ever since. Not the memory of it, not the reproduction of it, but the feeling itself, the particular combination of physical effort and altitude, and the particular quality of silence that existed only above a certain height. Today, he had not reached that silence. He wrapped his hands around the mug of tea the hut keeper had placed in front of him without asking. The tea was hot and slightly too strong and tasted of the particular combination of dried herbs that the huts always seemed to use, a taste that was both generic and specific, the taste of mountain emergency comfort. He was a Capricorn. He had always found this description both reassuring and faintly damning. The sign of the mountain goat, the sign of steady upward progress, the sign that understood better than any other that the only way to reach the top was one step at a time, with patience, with planning, without cutting corners or expecting shortcuts. He understood this. He lived by it. He had also, for most of his 23 years, applied it exclusively to external goals: the peak, the grade, the certification, the position, without ever quite turning it inward and asking what it would mean to apply the same patience and planning to the interior landscape, to the parts of himself that were not peaks to be climbed, but terrain to be understood. He looked at the mountain through the window. The snow was coming down in long diagonal sheets now, the kind of snowfall that made the mountain invisible except as an impression, a dark mass behind the white. It was still there. It would be there tomorrow. He was not sure yet whether this was consolation or accusation. Chapter 2. The hut had 6 bunks and 1 table and a wood stove that the keeper had fed with practiced efficiency and that now threw heat into the small space with the particular generosity of fires that had been built correctly. Jonas was the only guest tonight. The keeper, a man of perhaps 60, Swiss German, weathered in the specific way of people who had spent decades at altitude, which was different from the weathering of people who spent time at sea or in cities, a particular kind of dryness and sharpness, as if the thin air had concentrated everything, had given him the tea, and then returned to whatever it was that hut keepers did in the evenings, which seemed to involve a great deal of quiet movement between small tasks. Jonas watched him for a while, not intrusively, the way you watched people in small enclosed spaces when the alternative was looking at yourself. The man moved without urgency. This was the thing that caught Jonas's attention. The complete absence of urgency in everything the keeper did. Not slowness, not laziness, but the particular ease of someone who had made peace with the pace of things and no longer felt the need to be moving faster than the task required. Jonas was almost never moving at the pace the task required. He was almost always moving faster. This was the Capricorn condition he had come to understand. Not the ambition. Everyone understood the ambition. It was the first thing people said when they found out a sign. "Oh, you're so driven. Oh, you're so disciplined," as if discipline were simple and ambition were straightforward, and there were no cost to either. The thing underneath the ambition, the particular restlessness that came not from wanting more, but from the deep-seated Capricorn suspicion that stopping, for any reason, was a kind of failure. He had failed today. Not really. He knew this. He had made the correct decision. He had read the weather correctly, had turned back at the right moment, had done exactly what experienced mountaineers were supposed to do when conditions deteriorated. His instructor would have approved, his father would have approved, any rational assessment of the situation would confirm that he had done the right thing. He still felt like he had failed. This was the part that the Capricorn descriptions rarely addressed honestly. The goal orientation was well documented. The ambition, the patience, the long-term thinking, all of it cataloged and celebrated. Less examined was what happened in the Capricorn mind when the goal was not reached, when the plan did not execute, when the mountain said no. The mountain had said no today. He looked at the stove. The fire inside it was doing what fires did, burning steadily, giving heat, requiring nothing of him except that he not extinguish it. It did not care about his summit. It did not care about his plan. It was simply warm, and the warmth was available, and he could receive it or not as he chose. He chose to receive it. He moved his chair slightly closer. Chapter 3. He had a plan for tomorrow. Of course, he had a plan for tomorrow. He always had a plan for tomorrow and for the day after and for the next 3 months, sketched out in the particular detail that Capricorns sketch things, not obsessively, not anxiously, but with the same methodical care that a good architect brought to a blueprint, the understanding that the quality of what you built depended entirely on the quality of what you planned. Tomorrow, if the weather cleared and the forecast suggested it would, he would attempt the summit again. Different approach, adjusted timeline, earlier start, accounting for the time lost today and the energy expended on the failed attempt, which he had already calculated and accounted for in his revised plan with the particular precision of someone who treated his own body as a system to be optimized. He had been treating his body as a system to be optimized for most of his life. It had mostly worked. He was fit and capable and had accomplished by 23 things that people twice his age hadn't attempted. He had done this through the application of sustained effort and careful planning and the Capricorn willingness to delay gratification indefinitely in service of a goal that was always somewhere above him, always one more summit, always the next thing after the thing that was supposed to be enough. The thing was never quite enough. He had understood this for a while, had filed it under things to examine later when he had more time, when the current goal was achieved, when he could afford to slow down and look at the machinery of himself with something other than utilitarian eyes. Later had not arrived. He was beginning to suspect that later would not arrive on its own, that it required the same intentionality that everything else required, the same decision, the same commitment, the same willingness to treat it as a goal rather than a byproduct. He thought about what his friend Petra had said to him last month. Petra was the only person he knew who said true things to him without softening them, which he valued in theory and found occasionally uncomfortable in practice. She had looked at him across the table in the cafe in Zurich, where they met every few weeks, a ritual he always kept because Petra was one of the few variables in his life that he had not optimized away. And she had said, "Jonas, When was the last time you did something that wasn't in service of a goal? He had thought about it genuinely. He had not been able to answer. She had not seemed surprised. He looked at the plan in his notebook. Tomorrow, 5 a.m. start, summit attempt, adjusted for conditions. He looked at it for a long time, and then he closed the notebook. Not forever. Tomorrow was still tomorrow, and the summit was still the summit, and he would still be up at 5. But for tonight, the notebook was closed. For tonight, the plan could wait. This was, for Jonas, a significant act. He did not say this to himself ironically. Chapter 4. The keeper had gone to bed. Jonas was alone with the stove. The fire inside it had settled into its steady state, not the high drama of a newly built fire, not the quiet patience of embers, but the middle stage, the burning that knew what it was doing and was doing it without performance. He had always found this stage the most interesting. The beginning was impressive, and the ending was melancholy, but the middle was true. He thought about what it meant to be in the middle of something. He was 23. By any reasonable accounting, he was at the beginning of his life, the beginning of his career, the beginning of his adult self, the beginning of whatever he was going to build over the next 40 or 50 years. He knew this intellectually. He did not always feel it. He felt most of the time that he was already behind. Behind what exactly was not always clear. Behind some internal schedule that he had constructed without quite knowing when or how, that had assigned him certain achievements by certain ages, and that tracked his progress against those assignments with the relentless precision of a system that had never been asked whether the assignments were correct. He had never asked whether the assignments were correct. This was the Capricorn trap, he thought now, watching the fire, not the ambition. The ambition was real and valuable, and he did not want to be without it. The trap was the assumption that the map was accurate. The willingness to follow the map so faithfully that you never looked up to check whether the territory matched. His map said, summit by tomorrow. The mountain said, not today. One of them was wrong. He was beginning to think it might not be the mountain. He thought about his degree. Civil engineering, 3rd year, ETH Zurich, one of the best technical universities in the world, which he had chosen not because he had dreamed of it as a child, but because it was the correct next step on the map, because it led where the map said he should go. Because a Capricorn with his grades and his ambition going anywhere else would have been, by the map's accounting, a waste. He did not regret it. He also was not certain he had chosen it. There was a difference between not regretting something and having chosen it, and he had spent 23 years moving too fast to examine that difference carefully. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm continued. The particular sound of alpine wind that was different from any other wind he knew, higher and more complex, as if the mountains were doing something to it, reshaping it as it passed through them the way they reshaped everything that passed through them. He listened. For the first time today, he simply listened. Chapter 5. The snow was still falling. He could hear it against the shuttered windows. Not loudly, not the dramatic drumming of heavy rain, but the particular soft weight of snow accumulating, the sound of something building up slowly and steadily, without urgency, without drama, simply adding to itself layer by layer with the patience of a process that had been doing this for millions of years and would keep doing it long after any of his plans were relevant. Snow did not have plans. Snow was simply snow, doing what snow did. And the mountain was simply the mountain, and the storm was simply the storm, and none of it had any particular opinion about Jonas or his summit, or the schedule he had assigned himself, or the internal assessment of failure that he had been running since 3 o'clock this afternoon when he had turned and started back down. The indifference of it was, he found, slightly consoling. He had spent most of his life performing for an audience that he had largely invented. The grades, his parents had never demanded them, had always said they were proud of him regardless, and he had believed them and also continued to get perfect grades because the imperfect grades were unacceptable to a judge who lived entirely inside his own head. The climbing, nobody was watching, nobody was keeping score, nobody's opinion of him changed based on whether he reached a summit or not. And yet he felt the failure, and yet the turn back felt like quitting, and yet the internal judge was running its familiar assessment. Insufficient. Try again. Do better. He was tired of the judge. This was new, not the awareness of it. He had been aware of the judge for years, had even named it privately in the particular Capricorn way of naming things in order to understand them better. What was new was the tiredness, the particular exhaustion of someone who had been performing for an audience of one for 23 years and had only very recently begun to wonder if the audience was worth performing for. He thought about what the mountain had actually given him today, not the summit. He hadn't gotten the summit, but 8 hours of walking in conditions that most people would not have attempted, through terrain that required every bit of his technical skill and physical capacity, alone in the Alps in November, with the kind of weather that made the world feel very large and himself feel very small, in a way that was not diminishing but clarifying. He had been clarified today, not the way he usually was clarified, not by achieving something, not by crossing a goal off a list, by the opposite, by the mountain saying no, and him having to find out who he was when the answer was no. He was still here. He was still himself. The no had not unmade him. This was, he thought, possibly the most important thing he had learned in 3 years of climbing. He just hadn't known it was a lesson until tonight. Chapter 6. He made himself another cup of tea. The hut had a small kitchen, A gas burner, a kettle, a shelf of mismatched mugs, a jar of the dried herbs that had produced the tea he had been drinking, and a handwritten note on the shelf that said, "Help yourself in 3 languages," which he found touching in the particular way that small mountain courtesies were always touching, the way altitude seemed to make people more willing to trust each other with the small things. He stood at the small window while the water heated. Outside, visibility was almost nothing, just the circle of light from the hut's exterior lamp and the snow moving through it, and beyond that, darkness. The mountain was invisible. The valley was invisible. The world had contracted to this, a circle of light in the dark, a wooden building, a kettle beginning to boil. He found this unexpectedly a relief. He had spent the day in a landscape of almost infinite visual information. The peaks, the route, the snow conditions, the cloud formations, the constantly shifting assessment of risk and possibility. His mind had been processing all of it continuously. The Capricorn mind that was always scanning for information, always building the next model, always trying to stay one step ahead of whatever was coming. There was nothing to scan now. There was nothing coming. There was just the circle of light and the snow and the kettle. He made the tea. He carried it back to the table by the window. He sat down. He thought about Petra's question. When was the last time you did something that wasn't in service of a goal? He had an answer now, or the beginning of one tonight, right now. This, not the tea. The tea was in service of warmth, which was practical, not the sitting. The sitting was in service of rest, which was necessary, but the thinking, the particular quality of thought that was happening right now, which was not directed at any problem and was not building toward any conclusion and was not optimizing anything. The thinking that was simply thinking, turning things over without destination, following threads without caring where they led. He could not remember the last time he had done this. Capricorns, he had read, were sometimes so focused on the summit that they forgot to look at the view. He had always read this as a warning about missing beauty. Stop and smell the flowers. Notice the scenery. Don't be so driven that you forget to appreciate what's around you. He understood now that the warning was about something more fundamental. It wasn't about flowers. It was about self-knowledge. If you never stopped climbing, you never found out what the climbing was for. If you never stopped performing, you never found out who you were without the performance. If you never let the mountain say no, you never found out what you were made of when it did. He was finding out right now. He was made of this, the tea and the window and the storm, and the willingness to sit with the failure and not immediately turn it into a plan for tomorrow. He was made of the capacity to be still, which he had not known he had, which perhaps he had not had until tonight. The storm continued. The fire continued. He continued. Chapter 7. He climbed into the bunk at 10, not because he was tired in the ordinary sense, because the day had been long and physical and the body had done serious work and deserved the serious rest that serious work earned. This was a Capricorn logic he could accept. Rest as something earned rather than simply taken. Recovery as an investment in tomorrow's performance. He was working on seeing it differently. For now, this framing was enough to get him into the bunk without feeling like he was giving something up. He lay on his back and looked at the wooden ceiling. The ceiling of the hut was very low, the kind of ceiling that existed not because someone had designed it to feel intimate, but because the materials and the altitude and the necessity of keeping the interior warm had produced this result, the way necessity often produced results that were accidentally beautiful. It was close and dark and smelled of old wood, and the particular mustiness of a building that closed itself against the cold for most of the year and had been doing so for a century. He found it unexpectedly comforting. He was not a person who was usually comforted by enclosed spaces. He was a person who was comforted by scale, by mountains, by distance, by the particular psychological effect of looking at something much larger than yourself and feeling your problems reduce to their correct proportions. But tonight, the enclosed space was what he needed. The low ceiling, the warmth, the sense of being contained by something solid while the storm continued outside. The mountain was still there. He could feel it, the way you felt large things nearby even when you couldn't see them. The mass of it, the patience of it, the complete indifference of it to whether he reached its summit or not, combined with the equally complete availability of it. It would be there tomorrow if the weather cleared. It would be there next month if he came back. It would be there in 10 years and in 100, offering the same route to anyone willing to try it, never running out, never becoming less. He thought about patience, real patience, not the strategic patience he usually practiced, the patience of delaying gratification in service of a goal, the patience of the long game, the patience that was really just deferred impatience, the other kind, the patience of the mountain, the patience of something that did not need to arrive anywhere because it was already completely what it was. He was not there yet. He was also, he thought, closer than he had been this morning. The storm outside had shifted in quality. Still present, still significant, but the particular edge of it had softened, the way storms sometimes shifted in the night from aggression to persistence, from the drama of arrival to the quiet fact of continuation. He breathed in and out. He thought about the summit. It would be there tomorrow, or it wouldn't. The weather might not clear, the conditions might not allow it. There might be another day of sitting in the hut with the notebook closed and the fire burning and the internal judge running its assessment of insufficient. He could survive that. He knew this now. The survival was not the question. The question was whether the surviving could become something else, not just endurance, not just waiting for the next attempt, but something more like the actual living of the time between the attempts. He was going to work on that. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow was for the mountain, if the mountain would have him. But after, in the time after, he was a Capricorn. He would always be climbing. The mountain would always be there. But tonight, just tonight, he was going to lie in this bunk and let the storm do what the storm did, and the mountain be what the mountain was, and his body rest the way bodies needed to rest after days that had asked everything of them. His eyes were heavy, not fighting it. For once, for this one night, not fighting it. Outside, the snow continued to fall on the Swiss Alps, on the glacier, and the peaks and the frozen lakes, and the ancient stone that had been here since before any human had looked up it and decided it needed to be climbed. Jonas slept. Not toward the summit, not in defeat, just completely, deeply in the middle of the mountain night, letting his body recover what the day had taken and his mind rest from the particular exhaustion of always knowing where he was going. He slept the way the mountain waited, without urgency, without apology, completely sure of itself, already exactly what it was supposed to be. Somewhere in the Swiss Alps, in a mountain hut from 1923, the storm is still falling, the notebook is closed, the summit can wait, and Jonas sleeps, not at the top, not defeated, just here, in the middle, exactly where he needs to be. The mountain will be there tomorrow. Good night, Capricorn.